Today's May 12th. We're sitting here in France Square, Yerevan. With us is Karen Vrtanesyan, editor of Razminfo, political commentator, analyst. I don't know what what the current title that you have today.
It's okay to go with military expert.
Military expert in military affairs.
I don't like that. Yeah.
Okay, perfect. Today, the same sort of program from yesterday continued. Throughout the day, there were car rallies throughout the city. And in the evening time, around 4 o'clock, there was a march to the Prosecutor General's office where the parents of the fallen soldiers, fallen heroes had appeared in order to give testimony. And that case has been initiated since last year through the work of Armenian, Pashinyan. But most recently, the parents decided to also request the Prosecutor General to arrest Nikol Pashinyan for treason, because essentially he confessed in Parliament. If the war didn't happen, we would have almost the same exact results, minus the deaths, 5,000 people, the wounded, and so forth. So the crowd went there to provide moral support for the parents of the fallen soldiers. And at nighttime, around I believe 7 o'clock, there was the usual large rally. The day was mostly uneventful until most recently, where we read that Avetik Chalabian, who was on our live last week, was arrested, ostensibly for issues related to this protest. Although I don't have the exact details, so I won't go into it. If anyone has, we can later talk about that. But I think that this is a good opportunity to start our discussion with Karen. So I have some friends who say that I'm not going to be I'm not going to be marching with the Dashnaks because one of their former ministers said a homophobic statement 15 years ago or something like that. I wanted to sort of help develop a framework for rationally assessing and coming to a decision, regardless of what's happening, regardless of all those arguments. Does it still sort of how can we arrive at a conclusion? Should or should people not be here? Most of the people I interacted with during this protest are not members of this or that party. So there's a lot of, I would say, a huge number of people who are here regardless of their party affiliation. But for some people, it seems to be important. So Karen, I wanted to ask you, what made you write that post today? And maybe just in general, let's begin by, I guess you had a long post, but what was your reasoning and why is that a fake sort of agenda that people should not be here because of X?
Because of something, yeah. First of all, let's go back to 2018. When the revolution of love and solidarity, as Nikol Pashinyan framed it, was going on, there was actually no love, no solidarity. There was lots of propaganda, aggressive propaganda towards so-called Nakhtinner, those who against Haga, against Serge Sargsyan. Later on, Robert Kocharian became a target for that. Some high-level military officers, generals, war heroes, etc., etc. Since the first day that Nikol Pashinyan entered the prime minister office, since the very first day, we've seen lots of aggressive propaganda, lots of enemy image creating, which are actually wartime propaganda techniques. One who is anyone who's researching propaganda, especially wartime propaganda, would be stunned by similarities of the propaganda that, let's say, Nikol Pashinyan is advancing, and, for example, Nazis propaganda, I don't know, any other aggressive dictatorial propaganda during wartime. And especially after the war, 44-day war. They put a stress, they put the emphasis on the divisive propaganda, on what is called now selling the doubt. Yeah. This is a technique that is used when you are obviously not on the right side of the argument. So to counter the arguments that are based on truth, you are trying to seed some doubt. Actually, this is what, for example, Turks are doing during when denying Armenian genocide. Exactly, yes. One to one. There is a book, and then there was a and it was made into a documentary called Merchants of Doubt, yes, which I recommend to all listeners to go and watch. You'll see very stunning similarities to what's going on here in Armenia. Now, what they are doing, first of all, they are playing on, they are trying to seed distrust among everyone. What Nikol Pashinyan's propagandists do now is not trying to defend Nikol Pashinyan, but is to try to change the focus from Nikol Pashinyan to anyone who's seen in the field. Okay? For example, they target Robert Kocharian on behalf of some, I don't know, liberals. Then they attack Serge Sargsyan on behalf of someone else. Since there is no politically active person whom you cannot criticize, there are always subjects on which you can speculate. At the end, you come to the messages that, okay, let's leave Nikol Pashinyan alone since everyone else is as bad as he is. So this is actually a propaganda for status quo. Let's keep the status quo because whatever happens, nothing is going to change to any good. And actually, the whole Nachkinnesh argument is all about that.
Go ahead.
Mm-hmm. Is all about that. Like, I don't want this person to be next government. I don't want that party to be in the next government, etc., etc. But as a result, what we have here now is that Nikol Pashinyan stays in place and continues to surrender Armenian territories, surrender Armenian interests, etc., etc. Actually, there are many more propaganda theses, propaganda messages that Nikol Pashinyan's people are trying to
spread, to
disseminate the narratives that are built on these messages. They are all about dividing people. Hayastantsis against Gharabaghzis, Nachkinner and against versus someone else, etc., etc.
Yeah. By the way, if you guys have any questions or comments, feel free to raise your hand. So going back to my question of, so yes, there is a lot of divisiveness. That was the general atmosphere starting from, I guess, late 2018 until now even. But besides sort of recognizing that, what would you say to someone who says, I will not be on the same stage as the former, corruptioner, even like, we had, so last week we even had someone who's here, who's walking, but when we asked them to go on stage, they said, as long as X and Y are on the stage, I will not be on the same stage.
It's not only stage, it's even on, it's about square.
Yes.
Like, yeah.
So How do you defeat that, essentially? How do you defeat the propaganda that has been so effectively, drilled into our brains?
The first thing is that many of the people who says this, these are just excuses for them. So if you remove their favorite antagonist, like, I don't know, person X, they will say, okay, and there is also person Y who need to be removed, so I come to the square. So for many who say this, for many of them, these are just excuses. So let's forget them. There are also people who are they are definitely anti-Nicole, but there are different reasons that keep them at home, to stay at home. Some of them are state employees, so they are afraid that they will be kicked out of work.
Yeah.
If they show any support to the protest.
In fact, I was talking to a neighbor today who said that they were, and this is according to them, that they were fired for the fear that they would go to a protest, and for the because their boss thought that they went to the protest, even though the employee did not attend. But there seems to be a strong element of this administrative use of administrative resources to prevent people to come to the protests if they're state employees.
Another thing is some people are afraid of aggressive Nicolacans among their friends, relatives, etc., etc.
Yeah.
Because there is lots of very aggressive propaganda against the protesters. And let's be honest, for many people, going out for a protest is a way out of normality. So they need to overcome that, which is not easy for people who, for example, have never took part in any protest, have never taken part in any protest. So for these people, they would, to some extent, they will try to find some excuses to delay their coming to the France Square now, right? Yeah. But this is the most important thing here is that the opposition needs to work with these people. It needs to talk with these people, even in small groups, not here, probably go and meet them at their companies, at some clubs, at their yards, etc., etc. This is very important work. The opposition representatives whom I talk to, they say they don't have enough resources, but this is absolutely necessary thing to do, to go and talk with people. What Nicole Pashinyan's supporters did in 2018 was this: they were talking with people. They were talking. Yes, they were lying. They were promising things that they did like quite contrary after they came to power, but they were talking. In 2016, I went to Karabakh in a delegation of representatives of, let's say, civil society, etc., etc. It was after the war in August 2016, and Nicole Pashinyan was with us to see what was done on the front line after the war, etc., etc. Like new defensive infrastructure was built, etc., etc. But Nicole Pashinyan was very supportive of that initiative. back then. But the most important, whenever he came out of the car, every time there was a small rally around him. Okay. He rallied people around him on every stop, on every point of the road where he had an opportunity to talk with people. This is what opposition needs to do now, and needs to do that very quickly.
Right.
I would like to talk about another propaganda thesis. It's that so-called peace agenda for peace that Nikol Pashinyan is advancing. And it is very hard to refute it because it plays on the emotions of the people. Yes. People are afraid of war, and what he's doing, he's actually blackmailing people with war. He says that if you remove me, a war will happen. But actually what he does now, the weakening of the army, the weakening of the whole state apparatus, etc., it actually leads us to a war.
It increases the likelihood.
Yes, the probability of war. But what he does, he says, okay, if something happens now with me, there's going to be a war. It's very hard to explain to the people that it is actually Nikol Pashinyan who leads to war, not the opposition. But even now, if we talk, we use his terms, we use his framing.
So for instance, whenever we say the era of peace, even when we're trying to criticize it, it automatically,
yes, it automatically advanced his message.
What do you have against the era of peace, right?
I actually say that Nikol Pashinyan is a war bringer. He will bring a war. He will bring a catastrophic war. He will bring a defeat and new deaths. Actually, it's another thing that opposition should work on. I think is clear and
mutually exclusive.
Yeah, non-mutually exclusive messaging for what they say. There isn't still like one agreed messaging on these protests. For many people, it is not still clear what this protest is about. And Nikol Pashinyan, by putting new agendas into the circulation daily, new scandals, new hysterical, some, I don't know, sensations, etc., etc., he all the time he keeps people from concentrating on what's the most important, on the essence of this protest, which is actually keeping Artsakh Armenia.
Do you have any questions from listeners?
Karen, I have some questions. We've actually chatted in Messenger a couple of times. I want to have your input on any type of military reforms that must have happened in the last year and a half since the war. There's been a lot of talk about military reform, professional army, etc., etc. But from my perspective, it's all been talk. I have no evidence from anyone or any press that there have been reforms or a rearming of our forces. Do you have input on this?
Well, it's been more than 2 months that we don't have chief of staff of the army staff. This is, I think, the best description of what's going on in the army.
And if you want even more, there is no military intelligence. Right?
Yes, no chief of military intelligence for more than 2 months. And only after 1.5 years, a person responsible for the military industry was appointed. It was like several days ago.
Okay.
Many officers in the army, they are under criminal prosecution now after the war. They have been called for interrogations, sometimes like for hours during the days. The Armenian, the conscripts for Armenia were removed from Karabakh. So what we have now is not are not reforms, but actually
cutbacks, I guess.
Cutbacks in the army.
Right.
Cutbacks in the army. What should have been done from the very first day after signing the trilateral declaration? The first and the most important thing was to restore the army. Actually, this is what Azerbaijan did. Azerbaijan started to recover its army, to recover its losses, to buy heavy equipment, to conduct military exercises right from the next day of ending the war. Armenia did nothing. No exercises, no regrouping, etc., etc. And we see the results of that. We saw Azerbaijanis walking into Armenian territory without a single shot in Sevlich, in Gerarkunik, and in some other parts. So we've seen surrendering the strategically important road to Iran, surrendering it to Azerbaijanis, etc., etc. So
for those just joining, I wanted to remind that we have Karen Vrtanesyan, a military expert, talking to us. Continue.
And I haven't seen any sign of a reform in Armenian army. There were talks about reforms, but even those talks weren't very, I mean, I didn't get nothing specific, even not even vaguely, nothing about what's going on, what they are going to change, how they are going to recover it, etc., etc. Nothing.
Right.
What we hear is mostly that promises. What we hear here are promises to. Promises to parents that their sons aren't going to serve in Karabakh, that probably the military service is going to be shortened, etc., etc., stuff like that. And they are they are making they pass laws which allows less people to be conscripted into army, etc. So honestly, I haven't seen any sign of any reform in the Armenian army since November 2020.
Karen, what do you understand when Pashinyan says a professional army? And is it really affordable for Armenia? Is it a good model for Armenia?
What he says is a myth which been around at least since 2010. It was being advanced by pro-Western organizations, so-called civil society, sponsored from the West, saying that we don't need conscripts, we can go with hired people, so-called professional military. But there is no country in the world that relies only on professional army if it had conflicts on its borders. For example, Ukraine tried to adopt that so-called professional army model. Actually, the real name for the term is all-volunteered army. They tried to change to that model in 2013, in the autumn of 2013, and what they got was war in in the spring of 2014. Just several months later, they had to go back to the conscription-based army. For Armenian, so-called professional army means having no army at all. Because if you have a serious conflict, you will lose your professional cadres in the matter of days. And how are you going to
Complete.
to resupply your army? You will not have time to prepare these people for the service, etc., etc. The conscription-based army is first of all it allows to have mobilization reserve. It allows to have well-trained people with experience in serving in the army who can be mobilized in the matter of days or weeks. If you don't have such an army, well, you'll have, let's say, 30,000 professionals, and you may lose your army, half of your army in the matter of days, without possibility to bring in new reserves, to mobilize new reserves. So for army, the so-called professional army system is actually, it means that you are not going to have an army capable of defending Armenia for longer than a week. If you remember the Versailles Treaty in 1918, when the Entente tried to demilitarize Germany, one of the points of the treaty was that Germany was prohibited to have conscripts. They needed to have professional army, and that was done on purpose, so they can't have additional reserves.
This is very interesting. A quick question to tail on that. Why doesn't Armenia expand its annual draft to women?
I think that wouldn't be necessary before 2020, because actually what we had in Armenia was quite enough to protect Armenia.
Maybe from a numbers perspective, yes, I think I agree. But from an equal access to all professions and the training and everything, why not allow the opportunity?
I think first of all, it can bring some other problems with it. For example, demographic problem. If you take out women if you take 2 years, let's say 2 years or 1.5 years from their life, that will definitely prolong the. It will postpone. Yeah, the age of marriage, which in turn will postpone when they have the first child, etc., etc. I mean, it may seem not a big deal, 1.5 years, etc., but given the current demographic situation, it will add insult to injury. Another thing is that that may be the population in general may feel it like something unacceptable that won't be accepted by the majority of population, I think.
You mean from a social cultural perspective?
Yes, from social and cultural perspective, it's going to be like, some guys, they try to avoid the draft, but they bring in women, etc., etc. I think that more viable solution would be to expand military training to all the men and to women who would like to volunteer. Actually, what we need now is something like territorial protection, territorial defense system, like in Ukraine. But I mean the units that have been integrated with the army. Because there are also units that were put together haphazardly and they are very ineffective, bringing the death toll, making the death toll higher, etc., etc. But if you have a system in place which would work with people for years, and this should be something working for years, like with some military, let's say, boot camps. For example, 2-week-long boot camps every 2 years, etc., something like that. That will definitely make our defensive potential higher.
Thank you. Any questions from
Welcome.
listeners?
If there are no questions, I can try to sort of start my own. I want to go back to see if we have exhausted the topic of divisiveness. And I know we described the problem. We sort of, I think, understand how it was all accomplished. So let me just sort of reiterate those points. It was, to me, it was a lot of fake, or at least so far unproven, criminal cases which have not reached verdict. So whoever's name needed to be blackened, there were criminal cases. In the case of Robert Kocharian, for 2 years he was in jail. There were several different charges against him. The major charge, the one that would, that he was advertised for as being an evil person and so forth, was dropped, which was
March 1st.
Yeah, related to March 1st, Section 301 of the Article 301 of the Armenian law. And everything else so far, even like with Mohamed Grigoryan, there was a deliberate effort by the authorities to, even with fake staged movies, they filmed the supplies that supposedly he had accumulated, tushonkas and whatever. They moved them around just so that for best effect, and they filmed it just like a movie would be filmed.
A thriller.
Yes, and shortly after, most people don't realize that shortly after, all those charges related to Tushonka were dropped, and the only charge I think that remained was possession of maybe, I don't know, I forget what the exact charge. Yeah, but in any case, unfortunately, Mohamed Grigoryan died in process, potentially also because of this extra stress on him. So again, inconclusive, and that seems to be the modus operandi of the Pashinyan regime, and using the threat of incarceration, then using incarceration and fake criminal cases to drag you basically to the courts. Like, I know if someone asked me, are you prepared to go and sit in jail for 2 years, even if after 2 years you could come out and your name would be completely cleared, I don't know if I would think, okay, how much can I pay to not do that, because I have a job, I have a life, I have a family, and unfortunately, no one. I mean, what struck me is that no one from the West, or at least not in a way that I would notice, says brings this up. Basically they're abusing the system in order to punish their opponents and in order to keep them in check and to blacken their name, because for those 2 years that Kocharian was in jail, the yellow journalist media that served this regime continuously used those points that hey, he killed those 10 protesters or 8 protesters and 2 police, he did this, he did that, he had billions of dollars of he had a Greek island in Greece which no one knows where it is so far, and the same, I mean, I don't want to isolate Kocharian, the same happened to every single other opponent, and it seems to be like a very well thought out practice.
Actually, there is also other type of putting restrictions on the criticism of regime. For example, they bake some criminal cases, let's say for heavy insults, etc., etc., which actually, I guess, wouldn't be they wouldn't be constitutional in any European or Northern American country, but that criminal cases help them to hinder the life, to stop people from doing things. Like they confiscate all the phones, all the smartphones, all the computers in the house. Yeah. Also the children's computers, the tablets, etc., etc., and then don't give them back for years. I know people whose all the communication means have been confiscated for years and haven't been returned yet. They also don't allow people to, for example, fly out of Armenia, etc., etc. So they don't put these people in jail, but they do everything to keep them from normal life. And I know many people who can't now participate in, for example, blocking the streets, etc., because they have criminal cases, and in case they are arrested, they may be thrown to jails. Yeah. So, I mean, those are stupid cases. In the end, they are all dropped, but it goes for years. They do not do they don't call you for interrogation for months. These cases are almost frozen. Yeah. But you are under the threat of arrest all the time.
Yeah. I know several people in that category. I know several people in the category of their entire, electronic possessions being confiscated. For instance, one of the most famous, not famous, but memorable to me was, which, I think it's its own topic, but when they leaked the conversation between Vrtanesyan, Khachaturian, Khachaturian, and Pashinyan, in order to sort of, it appeared that the leaks resulted in sort of, the arrows were pointing towards Khachaturian, that it was Khachaturian's team who did it. The allegations were made that Armenian oligarchs, Armenian billionaires have these equipment for wiretapping, and they were using this. And the next day, Pashinyan, as soon as that leak happened, Pashinyan went on the pulpit and said, "We're going to come after you. We're going to sort of find out who did this." And that's when actually that was in the, I guess, peak of when that black versus white division was happening. So I know some people, the authorities suspected of having those recordings, and they confiscated their computer equipment for years, more than a year, I know at least. And these are like regular.
It was a news outlet. It was a press. Media outlet.
Yeah, are you talking about Haik Nahapetyan?
Haik Nahapetyan, Yerevan Today.
Yerevan Today, yeah. But in reality, the case of that wiretapping and release of that was never solved, or at least it hasn't been solved yet as of today. More than 2 years, almost, I guess, more than 3 years, and it's all gone quiet. But at least from the perspective of the silencing your opponents, the regime sort of capitalized on that. But how do we, so you said that, okay, the opposition needs to sort of have a discussion with every single person, door to door. How do you see that happening in today's Armenia, where everything is so polarized? How do we reach those people, and how can the opposition do that today?
Well, reaching out to people, that's the most important part. I've seen how when you talk to people, you talk to them sincerely. When you accept some of your faults, you don't behave as, I'm an elite, etc., etc. People start listening. Not all of them. But today there are many people who understand that Pashinyan leads Armenia to another disaster, maybe a mortal disaster for the Armenian state. But and these people need to be talked to.
Right.
These are not people who are looking for excuses, they are looking for the answers. And the sooner opposition finds and communicates these answers to these people, the better. Otherwise, this wave may be
yeah, it may die down.
Yeah, it may die down because it's been already more than a month, and it's exhausting people who are protesting on the streets. And there is no much time left for the opposition to communicate with with
Undecided.
yeah, to undecided people, but who are actually against Pashinyan. Definitely, they are against Pashinyan.
Right. Any questions, people?
Artsakh, go ahead.
Hi, you guys. I have a question. My name is Emma, and I have a question regarding this demographic issue we were talking about earlier, regarding women joining the army in Armenia. Do we have any numbers from Israelis whether they have this issue? We always tend to compare ourselves
I
with
had
them.
Israel
we really
in mind
need a
when
good
I was
army,
talking about
and
it as well.
the question about women joining army was quite a lot of people were talking about that during the war. So, what do you think?
Well, I was waiting for such a question because it always comes up when we discuss this. Well, in Israeli, they have much better demographic situation than in Armenia. There are different reasons for that. As far as I know, I'm not professional on this. I'm not a specialist, but as far as I know, first of all, one of the main sources of their demographic, how to say it, growth, yeah, are Orthodox Jews who are exempt from the army. Also, there is very good infrastructure, which means like kindergartens, support, maternal support, etc., etc. So that helps to somehow compensate that years spent in the army. Can we reach such kind of state that we have all this infrastructure, etc.? I believe, and actually, we are discussing now some, let's say, plans, some visions of Armenia's future, and I call it rational nationalism. And as one of the points, we understand that in modern society, women cannot be treated the same way as they say, let's say they were treated in agrarian societies of 19th century. So having such an infrastructure which would help families, it's not only about women, it's about families mostly living in the cities, urban families, to have more children than they usually have, like 1 or 2 children. And there should be lots of emphasis on creating respective infrastructure. That's very important, like healthcare, children care, education, etc., schooling, etc. Because otherwise, there is no way to make people have more children. I mean, that may work for some very religious, for some agrarian societies, but not for modern Armenia.
Karen, to me, you are making the point for reverse engineering what needs to be done for military reform, to be honest.
Reverse engineering?
In the sense that you are defining the premises that are needed so that you can have a powerful army.
Because of what happened, because of the results of 44 days war, our security situation is much worse than it was before.
Yes.
So now we need to have we need a mobilization. Mobilization, I don't mean that we all go to the army, but I mean the society should be mobilized around solving the existential problems of the nation.
Yeah.
And that means that everything should be put into the service of three important things to do. We called it Azgain Banazev national formula, which is in Armenian it's Anvetaանգություն, արդիականացում, առաջընթաց, security, modernization, and progress.
Right.
And behind every of these words, I mean, these are nice words, right? But behind every of these words, there is a huge, there is a huge problem. There are huge problems that needs to be solved, and this is what we are working now. We have a small group of people dedicated to this case, who are trying to understand what needs to be done. We are wandering away from the subject of today's podcast or live, but I think one of the biggest problems of these 30 years, it wasn't corruption, it wasn't the so-called talan, etc., but the worst. We had two most serious problems as a nation state. First, we didn't modernize fast enough to be able to see and to react to the challenges rising, and especially security challenges. Second, after the failure of modernization, second was that we were never expecting large-scale war. I mean, when I say we, I don't mean myself, because I've been talking about large-scale war looming since 2014, I believe. But Armenian elites, they were not expecting a huge, large-scale war. And the society, the state apparatus, it wasn't prepared for a large-scale war.
It's been 45 minutes at least, and it is kind of cold here. So I want to let people, if they have any more questions, maybe one or two more questions, if you have them.
Okay. Well, then, since there are no questions, let's end this, and we'll be back tomorrow.
Okay.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Sounds good.
Talk to you all soon. Bye-bye. Thank you, Karen.
Thank you.
Yes.